So now I want to look at two ways to create a repository on your local machine, to create a local repository. The first one is to go to GitHub and get signed in. And when you click on your account, you can see repositories. And then you can create a new repo. You can give it a description. And then we're going to leave it as public if you've got the free account. If you wanted a private, if you had a paid account, you could do that. But this is one that's important for us. Initialize this repository with a readme. If I check that, it's going to create the repository, initialize it, and put a file in there that you can then clone down to your local desktop. Okay, the repo's been created. If I click on my name and repositories, I can see it. And I can click into it, and I can see there's one file in there now. If I open the git bash, I like to work from my desktop, so I'm going to change onto my desktop. I can git clone, and then I need to enter a URL. And this is the URL right here. If I'm using HTTP, there's the URL. If I'm using GET, there's the URL. We are using SSH, so you make sure SSH is selected, and there it is. So git clone. And this is the password for your SSH keys that you created earlier. And now if I ls, I can see there's a test directory there. If I look at my desktop, I can see it right here. So now adding documents and then pushing this back to GitHub becomes very simple. Let me just add a document here and put some information in it. Save it. So now in Git, if I check the status, I can see that I'm not in the repository. I'm still in the desktop. So I need to cd into the test repository. Now I can get status. And I can see there's an untracked file. And remember, our file statuses can be untracked, tracked, staged, and committed. Right now I'm untracked. So I want Git to track this. So the way that you track a file is git add and the file name. Now in this case, git add will track the file and stage the file, both. Remember, when a file is staged, that means that it's ready for a snapshot or a commit. If I check the status, I can see that there's changes to be committed and there's one new file. So I can git commit, give it a message. And the change has been committed. If I get status, I see there's nothing else to commit. The commit has taken place locally on the local working copy. Now I want to take these commits and push them back to GitHub, to the remote repository. I can just simply git push origin. So GitHub is known as the origin master, and the local copy is known as master. So it's git push, where do you want to go, to origin, and what do you want to push? Master from local. So origin is GitHub, master is the local copy. Okay, And now if I look at GitHub, I should see another commit. Notice there's one commit. Now there's two. So that initial commit was when I initialized it, when I created the repository, and then the second commit is when I added the test file. Here's a list of all the files that are in there. Now, if I want to delete a repository, I need to actually click into the repository. So I was in test. I'll go back into test. And then if I click on the settings while I'm in that repository, and I go all the way to the bottom, I can delete this repository. It wants you to enter the name and then confirm. And now that repository is gone. I have a second way to add a repository. For that, I will just add a repo and give it a name. I'm not going to initialize it, I'm just going to create it. And now it's just basically an empty folder that's sitting there. Here's my URL for it. And notice the URL for SSH is always going to be the same. It's get@github.com, colon, and then your username, /, and then the name of the repository, .get. So it makes that URL a little easier to understand. So I'm going to get out of I'm in test right now. I want to get out of there. So cd ... I want to get into the homework 4. And now that I'm in homework 4, I want to create the repository. So I'm going to get in it. I'm going to initialize the repository. If that homework 4 directory was not already created, I could right click and do a new and folder on the desktop, or I could mkdir, make directory, space homework 4. Then I need to change into that directory, so cd into homework 4, and then I can initialize it. And after it's initialized, there's nothing in it. I can delete this test. Now when I check git status, there is an untracked file, so I'm going to add it. And this adds and stages at the same time. And so now the file is being tracked, so git will watch for changes to it. And I'll go ahead and commit it since it's staged. So I have a commit. I want to push this to the remote repository. So the first thing I need to do is add the remote repository. So I want to add an origin or add a remote. So it's git remote add origin, and then I need the URL, git@github. And then I can push. look at it on GitHub. I have one commit. It's called second, but there's only one. And there's my file. And if I click my file, there's a little bit of text that was in it. So there we have two ways of adding a repository. We can either do it through GitHub, initialize it through GitHub, clone it down, or we can create it from scratch on the local machine. We can initialize it on the local machine. So if we were on an airplane and we wanted to create a new repository, we could do that. And then when we had connectivity again, we can just add the origin and tell it the name, the URL. And this URL is what it should be on GitHub. Remember, we had to create it blank on GitHub. And then after we've added the origin, then we can push it. And when we push it, it'll make the connection. And then for repositories that we no longer need on GitHub, we looked at how to delete them by clicking into them and clicking on Settings, scrolling down and deleting the repository.